John Schneider is a genius. And no, he hasn't made a move. It's because of the move that he didn't make. I'm going to get into that in today's video. But before I do, I want you to take an initial reaction right now. Don't think, just type. Is John Schneider a genius? Type Y for yes, type N for no. And let's get into the video. Now, I said, as I started off this show, that John Schneider was a genius. And here on Seahawks Today with Will Ortner, sometimes we get into some hyperbole, but I don't believe that we're being hyperbolic here. And that means exaggeration or overemphasizing to those of you who don't have 2 college degrees. But I want to make sure that I get this point clear. John Schneider made the right move by not making a big splashy trade this offseason after I looked at the Micah Parsons trade with Green Bay and the Dallas Cowboys that happened yesterday. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Will, you're a moron. Might be true in some situations. But when the Packers can make a big trade for Micah Parsons, an edge rusher, a player that some people, we're going to rank him top 5 defensively minimum in the NFL. I think there's a case to be made for him being the best defensive player in the NFL. Why would you not make a trade like that for him? If you're the Dallas Cowboys, hey, I mean, it's kind of a bummer, but you do end up getting 2 first-round picks out of the deal. What could those first-round picks turn into? In my eyes, it's always best to stay out of the big purchases. And what I mean by that is when you think about this Green Bay team right now, did Micah Parsons make them a Super Bowl contender if they were already not in your eyes? And if you're not from the city of Green Bay, if you're not a Packers fan, if you're not Blake Sparks, local resident cheesehead, you might not think that this Packers team is a Super Bowl contender. I certainly don't. I did not believe they were a Super Bowl contender before the trade. I did not believe that they were a Super Bowl contender after the trade. Maybe you think differently. Maybe you look at this trade between the Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers and you say, Will, you're an idiot. The Packers won this trade. The Packers got a top player in the NFL, and the Packers now have a team that can win a Super Bowl. Maybe you look at the Cowboys and you say, hey, this is just Herschel Walker 2.0. You got 2 first-round picks out of the deal. You can start the rebuild. I want you to let me know who you think won the deal. If you think it's Green Bay, type Green Bay in the chat. Type GB. If you think it's the Cowboys, type DAL in the chat. Personally, for me, I think it's kind of going to end up being a tie. There's a rush to judgment when it comes to these trades. Whoever got the bigger player right now, well, of course, they won it. Fleeced them. I heard it all around Chat Sports HQ. Run around. Cowboys got fleeced. Oh, we got fleeced. What happens if in 2 years those 2 first-round picks turn out to be some pretty special players? I think there's an opportunity that Dallas can still come out on top. We'll see if that remains to be seen. Now, I want to look at some of the past big Seattle Seahawks trades. And my reasoning for this, and I promise it's going to get back to John Schneider being a genius, is that Schneider has taken shots. He's made big moves as the Seahawks GM in the past. And I've got 3 examples that I want to run down where we have a conversation about what really ended up happening over the longevity of those trades. The first one I want to take a look at is the Jimmy Graham trade. Remember, when Seattle traded for Jimmy Graham back in 2015, it was a big deal. It was Seattle making a big splash after 2 back-to-back trips to the Super Bowl. You're getting Russell Wilson, your star quarterback, your franchise QB. You're getting him a player that can be a difference maker in the pass-catching game. Seattle obviously gets Jimmy Graham. You trade away your starting center, Max Unger, who, albeit, to be fair, had some injury issues. He still was the captain of your offensive line. You traded away a first-round pick for him, and you got back a 4th-round pick in 2015. When I look at the longevity of this trade, it is a tie at best. And don't get me wrong. When that trade went through, I was running around, had my hat off. Woo! Seahawks, Jimmy Graham. He's amazing. He's so great. He's the best tight end in the NFL right now. What did that do for Seattle? He had a couple years where, don't get me wrong, he was pretty decent. But what did Seattle do that he didn't do well at? Seattle liked to run the ball. Jimmy Graham didn't like to block. Jimmy Graham is a basketball player. Jimmy Graham at the University of Miami did not crave contact because he was a basketball player. Basketball players typically, unless they're Ron Artest, sorry, Meta World Peace, do not like to be involved with contact. He was not a good run blocker, and it showed. You also traded for Jimmy Graham after he'd already exploded. So you had 1 or 2 good years of him right around his peak, and then he slowly waned off. Plus, when's the last time that Seattle had a good offensive line? Probably right around that first Super Bowl, maybe the second Super Bowl as well. Max Unger was a spearhead and captain of that unit. Now, I understand he had some injury issues. He was still leading the way from that center position. And ever since that trade, I'd make the argument you haven't really been comfortable at that center position. You had a couple good years there with Britt, but you really haven't been too comfortable. So I would mark that down as a tie. And maybe New Orleans Saints fans will disagree and they'll argue with me in the comments. Now, the next big trade that you made. I remember when this trade was made. I was in my high school focus class. So think homeroom. My teacher put the press conference up after the trade got made. And that's when Seattle made the trade for Percy Harvin. The entire room in Mrs. Johnson's home base classroom was running and jumping around. Seattle got their guy. They finally had a top-tier target for Russell Wilson to find. They were going all in. They made the trade with the Vikings, a 2013 first-round pick, a 2013 seventh-round pick, and a 2014 third-round pick, all for Percy Harvin, a guy who was a good wide receiver, but was kind of more known for his big play ability. When he made big runs in the kicking game, he was a great kick returner, great punt returner. Just look at that Super Bowl. He was an electric player when the ball got in his hands at Florida, and he was pretty darn good in Minnesota. But I'll tell you right now, that trade was a big, gigantic L for Seattle. What did Percy Harvin do in his time here? What Percy Harvin did in Seattle is he ran one kickoff back in a Super Bowl that you were already dominating in, and he may or may not have punched Golden Tate before the Super Bowl. That's pretty much what he did, and you shipped him off a couple years later. You gave up a first round, a third round, and a seventh round pick. All of those picks for Percy Harvin, who was here for a cup of coffee and not the Starbucks kind, and really didn't do all that much. That's a loss. That's too big of a trade to have that. That is a big L in my opinion. Now you want to join the family. I've got one more trade that I'm going to get through that we need to talk about and continue my diatribe of why John Schneider is a genius. But you want to subscribe to the family. You want to join the channel. You want to join this community of 12s that we're creating here at Seahawks Today, because what we do is give you the best Seattle Seahawks news, information, video content. You want to subscribe to the channel so that way you don't miss any of it. Now, the last big trade for Seattle is much more recent. And it was one that, again, at the time, I got on Twitter and I had Twitter fingers and I was telling everyone, Seattle Super Bowl loading. And I'd make the argument it's the most egregious of the 3 trades. It's Jamal Adams. You took a gigantic swing for Jamal. And I kind of understand the logic, but now as I'm older and I know what the outcome is and I can play Monday morning quarterback, this might be one of the worst trades in Seattle Seahawk history. Not only did you give up 1 first-round pick, you gave up 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick and Bradley McDougall. Well, okay. It's more so the picks. You gave up 2 first-round picks and a third-round pick for Jamal Adams. Look, it's cool. You got a 2022 fourth-round back. None of it equals what you thought you were getting out of Jamal. You thought with Jamal you were getting an all-pro safety. You thought you were getting a smaller version of Cam Chancellor. And again, another big, gigantic L on this trade. Because Jamal was great that first year. Blitz boy, oh, he was flying around, making big-time sacks, making big-time plays. I think he ended up getting to double digits. If not, he was right there. I didn't even believe he broke the record for most sacks by a defensive back. And then he was injured and didn't do anything the rest of his career in Seattle. I loved him, man. I liked what he was doing. I liked the way he talked. I liked how brash he was. I thought he was maybe the final piece for that Seahawks team. I think we all kind of were a little bit in denial of how high that team could truly soar. And so in my eyes, when I look at this team, that's just an absolutely brutal loss. It's a loss of a trade. And John Schneider is a genius in this fact. He's gone through and he's made big trades. He's gone after big splashes. And instead of saying, hey, I'm going to make another big splash, he's learned from his mistake. Seattle doesn't need a top edge rusher. Think about those Legion of Boom teams. Think about how good they were. Did they have a true blue elite edge rusher? Or did they have 2 or 3 edge rushers that were really freaking good at what they did? And they were versatile. And you can use them at a bunch of different positions. Think about Cliff Averill. Think about Michael Bennett. Those aren't like top tier, way ahead of everybody. Those are 2 guys who are pretty darn good at what they do. Top 10 guys at what they do. Definitely not number 1 guys. When you look at this edge unit right now when it comes to the depth chart, DeMarcus Lawrence, look, he's probably not his peak. He's still pretty darn good when it comes to getting off the edge. Uchenna Nwosu, he's pretty darn good when he's healthy at getting off the edge. A guy who can play a multitude of positions. Producer Reed's nodding his head right along with me right now because he agrees. Jared Ivey, what can that kid turn into? He has a blank canvas right now. He could take a step forward that we don't even see. Boye Mafe, I'm just now getting to him. How many times have we seen him go on a run where he had 3 or 4 games where he gets 4 or 5 sacks? He's in the backfield getting a lot of pressure on people. Schneider has clearly learned from his mistakes, and he's gone back to what made him so great and helped create that Legion of Boom team. He goes and he uses the draft, and by using the draft, you develop talent. Just look at this quote that he's talking about here. He doesn't want to outright say what individual he traded for, but it was a guy who became the highest player on the team. A lot of people are pointing fingers at potentially Percy Harvin, potentially Jamal Adams. He goes, I'll never do that again. It's just not a winning philosophy. Again, when you look at the Vegas odds, when a team makes a big trade for a player that isn't a quarterback, when's the last time it was successful? When was it the last time in Vegas that a edge rusher made a team's win total go up by more than 1 game? When have you ever seen a team go from a 9.5 win team to a 10, 11, 12.5 win team just because they made a trade for a guy like Micah Parsons? Schneider has made those trades before. I'd make the argument, yeah, the Percy Harvin one, you end up winning a Super Bowl. You didn't win that Super Bowl because of Percy Harvin. You would have won that without him. Jamal Adams kind of set you back. You were taking one last grasp trying to get there. Didn't end up working out. Jimmy Graham was fine. He was okay. But he didn't help push you to new heights that you'd never seen before. And frankly, he didn't fit in the system that you were trying to build. Seattle right now is not one piece away from winning a Super Bowl. Seattle is a team that is building. I think you are a playoff team. With those edge rushers that you have, if they can continue to grow, if the young guys like Ivy, Mafe, Hall, if they can learn from guys like DeMarcus Lawrence, they can learn from Uchenna Nwosu, and those guys can continue to play at a high level, what could this team possibly be? You didn't need to make a swing for Trey Hendrickson. You didn't need to take a swing for Micah Parsons. You needed to trust the process and hope that your process is better than producer Reed's Philadelphia 76ers. You needed to trust that your process and John Schneider could get you back to the promised land. And in my eyes, it was genius of him not to do anything because there were a lot of people in the media that wanted John Schneider to make a move. There were a lot of people in the media that as soon as they saw that Schefter tweet that wanted the Seahawks to offer a Hall or a Mafe and a couple firsts to go get it. And I think it was the wrong move. Do you agree with me? Now that you've listened to the whole video and you know what my take is, and I've ran through examples of some failed big trade experiments here in Seattle, do you think that Schneider is a genius for sitting on his hands and doing nothing? I want you to go in the comments, type Y for yes, or type N for no. And we'll get to the bottom of it. We'll have a nice little conversation. I always check the comments. I always respond if you want to talk Seahawks football with me and create a nice and loving community. Until next time, I'll see you later.